Good morning, Revolution, and welcome to our show, everyone. Happy to see everybody. Rosanna is still away. She's flying the friendly skies back. She'll be here tomorrow, so she'll join us next week. And good morning to Anita. Welcome, Karen. Happy to have you. Scott, where are you running off to, buddy? He'll be back. Have no fear. Mr. Scottman is here. Well, the first thing I want to do is say Happy Workers' Memorial Day. Today is Workers' Memorial Day, and that's the day when the trade union movement and the working class pays attention to injury and death on the job and the all important issue of health and safety. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. Second thing, before I forget, Monday is May Day. So we want to wish all of our comrades and friends and fellow workers, both here and abroad, a happy International Workers' Day. It's a big day, and we'll be celebrating it here in New York on May Day at Washington Square. I believe there's a march and demonstration. We'll have a party contingent. And we might even be joined by a special guest. So if you're in the New York area, please come by and check us out on Monday. Uh, this is also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Sexual assault, and we're dedicating today's program to that theme. Very, very important issue. And I think I'd like to start off by talking about it, by connecting it to Workers' Memorial Day, Anita,
Hmm.
because this is a day, as I said, when we pay attention to, as a class and as a movement, injuries suffered on the job, you know? And we found out that 38% of all women, according to one study, experience sexual harassment in the workplace. It's almost
Hmm.
104. And 80% are of women are victims of rape and sexual assault that take place in the workplace. But there's another
Hmm.
dimension of problems faced by women who work. And Anita, that's women who work in the home, in reproductive labor.
Hmm.
And nobody's paying attention to it. Why do you think that is?
Hmm.
And that's,
Well, I think people have. Oh, go ahead.
no, I'm done.
Uh, well, I think people have paid attention to it over the years. There were some big advances in recognizing the scourge of domestic violence. Maybe 25 years ago or so. But I think just from everything we've read this week about the sexual assault awareness month was really frightening about the increases in these numbers. I know domestic violence really increased during the pandemic when people were at home, and the home became a very constrictive environment. People couldn't escape from abusive spouses and spouses who were very frustrated with the situation in their own lives. And then the rise in domestic sexual assault in schools we've seen in the even the Defense Department put out a study about the extraordinary rise in sexual assault experienced by women who are students at these academies. And I know colleges have also seen that rise. And I think it's all of a piece with, as you have here, this uh, sprinting towards fascism or galloping towards fascism. I think it's all a piece with those trends, sadly. So I think we really have to. I mean, that's why it's so important to have an awareness month like this.
You know, Taryn, in preparing for the show, I did a Google search of the themes of the month, and there were very few stories that came up on the issue. and most of those that did come up were on college campuses. And so, women's studies, or rape centers, paying attention to this issue. But as a class, um, isn't it the case that we our movement, and I'm talking about the working class and trade union movement broadly, still don't pay enough attention to this issue in general, and specifically as it refers to um, women who are engaged in reproductive labor in the second shift after they come home from work.
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of that boils down to shame, unfortunately. I was 16 years old when I was first sexually harassed and assaulted on the job. I worked at a sports bar, and, a manager like kind of touched me inappropriately while I was working. And I felt this sort of like overwhelming sense of shame about it. And I think that that's how a lot of women and girls and other people who are sexually assaulted at work feel. They feel like there's an overwhelming sense of shame, and I feel like that's double in the home, because the home is considered to be, under bourgeois capitalism, sort of like this private sphere where nobody is supposed to know what's going on there. It's not nice to talk about what it is that's going on behind closed doors. But the thing that's really the most tragic about sexual assault is that it prevents broader class solidarity. If you're at work, and if the women and girls at work or other people at work are being sexually harassed and assaulted on the job, it's more difficult to form a united sort of front against the boss. And likewise at home, it's difficult to build a sort of broader mass struggle when there is still this violent division between genders at the home based on violence, basically.
Scott, this is not a small problem. It's not a problem that exists for a small cohort. I mean, 1 in 5 women, according to the data, are raped during their lifetime, and some men, but women much more. Half of all women, uh, according to the data, experience some form of sexual violence victimization. And Angela Davis made a point in one of her writings that we cannot grasp, she says, sexual assault without situating it in the larger socio political, economic context. What are some of those contexts, in your opinion?
Well, well, I would say starting with the very kind of broadest picture, sexual assault and sexual violence of all forms, in fact, violence of all forms is contrary to the sort of nature and essence of the working class, which is based on equality and on solidarity. Um, Sexual violence is something that is not only condoned but encouraged by capitalism, and the traits that further it, the misogyny, the toxic masculinity, those are encouraged by capitalist culture because they put people in positions of vulnerability. They create those divisions, as Taryn said, and capitalism requires that at least some section of our class be kept in, well, that our entire class be kept in various kinds of vulnerability. So that I think is the largest context. Um, and then we have to uh, look as well at the ways in which violence against um, women and sexual assault, sexual violence more broadly, um, intersects with racial and national oppression, with homophobia and transphobia. All of these things weave together, and again, I think Taryn hit it right on uh, the nose. That's probably a bad metaphor, given that we're talking about violence. But Taryn was right on in emphasizing that it's corrosive to the unity of our class and our ability to unite and build a better world.
Anita, rape and sexual assault is much in the news today because of the trial that's taking place in New York of Jean Carroll,
Mhm.
who um, allegedly was raped by Mr. Trump some years ago. And that's a horrific thing, and we hope that she gets justice. Uh, Scott also pointed to the racial dimension of this issue, where, according to data, 60% of Black women are subjected to coercive sexual assault by the age 18. And I imagine that the statistics are similar for Latino women. And for Native American women, they're at risk of being sexually assaulted twice as much as non-Native women. And then as you dig into the data, it just goes, it gets more and more horrific. Women with disabilities are twice as likely to experience sexual assault. And women with multiple disabilities are at the greatest risk.
Mhm.
Again, putting it within this larger political, economic, and social uh, framework. Um, how do we account for it, and what should we do about it?
Well, Joe, I think that that's a function of the overlapping hierarchies of power that we have in our society right now, where nationally oppressed groups do experience that kind of powerlessness a little bit more, well, more than the majority. For instance, of somebody like E. Jean Carroll, she's a very accomplished white woman, very, a writer with a considerable amount of power, and yet even she demurred from bringing up charges at the time because she had experienced that same kind of shame that Taryn was talking about. So with women of color and other people with disabilities, they may even feel that powerlessness even more thoroughly, and it takes a lot of courage to make an accusation of after a sexual assault. I think we have to recognize that and make it more make it easier for women to come forward and not punish them for doing so.
Taryn, isn't this also a product of rampant sexism in our society, male supremacy, and chauvinism, and the notion that somehow women are property and you can just do whatever you want? You know, isn't that part of what we're dealing with here?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Dimitrov and Claudia Jones write pretty effectively on fascism and its relationship to sexism, and how it's sort of like it's seen as giving people scraps from the table. It's like, well, you can't have a union at work, but you can go home and beat your wife. You can't have good schools for your children, but when they get home, you can treat them however you want. There is like a huge sort of property aspect to it. And that goes back in legal history as well, because it wasn't until relatively recently in human history that women and children weren't considered to be the legal property of men. And I think that folks sometimes forget about how recent a lot of those changes have been, and taking it for granted, you end up with stuff like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which obviously is violence against women as well. So yeah, no, of course there's a huge relationship to sexism. It definitely tries to give scraps to men, you know, just like it would to white workers, to say, well, you're not going to have higher pay, you're not going to have protections on the job, but you can feel somehow like racially superior because of the color of your skin. It's all BS, you know, like it's not really a solution to anyone's problems. It just serves more and more to divide the class and make it pretty impossible for people to unite and organize against capitalism and imperialism.
And Scott, while we put this into the larger social and political and economic context, we also have to recognize that men, we guys, have a special responsibility to confront this issue. I mean, given the fact that, half of women experience some form of sexual assault during their lifetimes, that assault is uh, perpetrated by a majority of men. I mean, Angela Davis also makes the point that somehow there's this idea that rape is committed by is an act of lust, and she says no, it's an act of power, of domination, and something and that committed by men who are considered quote unquote normal. Uh,
Exactly. And again, you can sort of see how this fits into capitalism, which is based on, at its heart, a violent, coercive relationship, an unequal relationship, and all of these other um, forms of violence, these inequalities that are um, sort of perpetuated by capitalism. Or under capitalism, through capitalism, work in that same way. Similar to what Taryn was saying about scraps from the table. It's you're you can't be a capitalist and control workers, but you can have that phantasm of power over over a woman, over a racially oppressed person, over so um, again, and men absolutely have to fight this because you know we always say an injury to one is an injury to all. How is that anything more than a hollow phrase if we're not able to confront this violence that you know um, that is directed at women. It's an issue that we have to be fighting um, every minute, and we have to be organizing against it, including in our own collectives, right? Making sure that there's no space for that kind of violent behavior um, in the collectives we're involved in.
and that means in the Communist Party, and I'm glad you brought that up. The party has a sexual harassment policy, but we also have to acknowledge that we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go, and we're just at the barest beginnings of paying uh, collective attention to this issue in a systematic, ongoing way. In that respect, I want to thank our comrade Rebecca for bringing the month to our attention. Thank you very much. And we have the responsibility of taking this issue into our work lives, into the mass movements, into the struggle for democracy, so that the month is commemorated and celebrated, and that the issues are paid attention to each and every day. And we hope that sooner than later, as part of Workers' Memorial Day, the problems of women at home, working at home, that unpaid labor, and the injuries that take place there are paid attention to in the course of the commemoration of this important day and on May Day going forward. Anita, uh, you and Taryn and Scott raised the issue of the connection of male supremacy and sexual violence to the growth of fascism. And we saw this week a chilling reminder of the evidence of this growth in state legislatures across the country when a trans woman was prevented not only from speaking in the state assembly, where was it, Idaho?
Montana.
Montana.
Iowa? Huh?
Montana.
Montana. I'm sorry. I got my I's and M's mixed.
It could as well happen in other places, though.
Well, it did just happen in
Tennessee.
Tennessee. It did. Now it's in Montana, and she was kicked out for expressing her point of
Hmm.
view. We said that there's a slow moving
Exactly.
Please
It's
elaborate.
it's moving a little bit faster now, and this is in she was silenced in the context of hundreds of anti-trans bills that are sweeping the country. Just almost in every state, we have that going on here in Ohio, but every place there are these anti-trans bills. And what she stood up and said, you know, if you pass this, you'll have blood on your hands because you'll actually cause death and destruction, or death to people. You'll and they were offended. You know, that offended their sense of decorum to be called killers. But you know, abortion bans also will cause deaths of women, a rise in the maternal mortality rate. And it just seems like there's this one person I've read recently said it was a kind of social sadism, you know, where cruelty is the point, and you might as well be cruel to the entire category of people. It's just a remarkable time. She was absolutely right. They do have blood on their hands, and now everybody sees that they're also anti-democratic, which is just the other side of that fascism. So I think it is all a piece. Abortion bans, anti-trans bills, making voting more difficult. All of these things are locked together in this far right plan for us that we have to fight every step of the way.
Taryn, is this a smart plan? I mean, you saw what happened in Tennessee. There was national outrage, coverage 24/7. The three legislators were invited to the White House on every talk show. Is this smart for the Republicans to um, not only, uh, you know, express being uncomfortable and so on and so forth, but not even uh, allowing them to, and then kicking them out of the assemblies? Is that going to help them gain support uh, over and above the 25-30% of the electorate that is supporting the MAGA agenda? You're from Florida. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that, you know, you look at it and you're like, these policies are totally not popular at all. You know, they're not popular. The abortion ban's not popular. The transphobia and the violence against trans people, not popular. Kicking elected representatives out of state legislatures because they mentioned that, you know, people have blood on their hands for banning trans people, or uh, you know, we need less guns on our street. That's not popular. None of this is popular. But I'm not actually convinced that the extreme right wants to win elections anymore. I mean, I don't think they care what's popular. I think that they think from their perspective that they've gerrymandered all of these different states all to hell, that they've got their judges in place and their judges are going to make undemocratic decisions. And so, you know, I was reading an analysis earlier about how this is really the ground floor challenge to democracy is taking place at the level of these state legislatures, because you do have people who are electing folks like Zooey Zephyr, who is a tremendously courageous person for standing up against, you know, a room full of people that were basically saying after they'd kicked her out that if they had a trans child, they would prefer for them to kill themselves than transition, you know. The cruelty is the point for sure. And I also don't think that they're trying to be democratic anymore. This is why I think Trump running again for president is so dangerous. We already know that the guy doesn't believe in democratic elections. Uh, and so, yeah, I just think this is a manifestation of that across the board. It's very scary stuff. And thank goodness that people won't stand for it. People are angry and taking to the streets about it. And that's the only way to fix that at this point, that and voting.
Scott, the concept, Taryn is making a powerful point here. The concept of winning ugly, first emerged in that race between Al Gore and Bush and the hanging chads in Florida and Terrence Holmes State and the whole big controversy around that. And it was put forward by none other than Dick Cheney. We're going to win, even if we win with a minority, and we're going to act like we have a big majority, and we don't care. And has the Republican, the fascist, the MAGA element in the Republican Party decided that, as Taryn is suggesting, that winning ugly is their national strategy? They're not interested in fairness. They're not interested in any. They're just going to take what they can, as much as they can, and go for broke, um, uh, and try to exercise power as a minority faction within the ruling class.
Absolutely, and they are a minority faction, and they've been the minority for a long time, but um, they've been allowed to continue in this sort of undemocratic behavior. And I think it's a good opportunity to revisit the way our party defines fascism, which is the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary element of the capitalist class. And what we're seeing with these anti-trans bills, with these bills that enable people to legally harass and persecute abortion providers and people who seek abortions, with these bills that criminalize protest. These are the beginnings of the mainstreaming of terrorism as a form of political power. These are measures that both sort of allow state terrorism, so the state to rule by fear and violence and direct coercion, and also encouraging private terrorist violence against oppressed people. So this has fascism written all over it, and yeah, I'm glad you pointed out, Joe, that this is we turned a corner in a certain sense with Trump's presidency, but the building of that anti-democratic minority rule apparatus has been going on for a long time, and in fact, has been going on since the very founding of this country, and um, especially in the reaction against reconstruction and the great gains that were made there. Um, so we're fighting for democracy.
We're fighting for democracy in all of its aspects. Small d, democracy, right to vote, right to reproductive rights, right to organize a union, right for health care, right to live in without fear of gun violence in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, kindergarten. Um, and one of the instruments for that, Anita, are the presidential, congressional, state assembly elections. And Scott's Ace Boom Coon, Joe Biden, Scott's neighbor, and now there he is, that he's running again, building a better America. And he says that freedom, I don't know if you saw the campaign commercial,
Mhm.
is the main theme of his campaign. Did you like the commercial? And what do you think about Mr. Biden's process? He's 80 years old, and people are raising questions about his age.
He's 80 years old, Joe. That means when he finishes his second term, he'll be 16 years younger than our friend B. Lumpkin is now. So, I think not every 86-year-old could handle it, but I think Joe Biden has shown that he's together enough. He's surrounded himself with good people. With people who are fighting fascism at any rate. So I thought the video was good in that he is co-opting this concept of freedom. I think we are fighting for freedom of the people who don't seem to be able to mind their own business. They want to tell us how we should raise our children, and what pronouns we can use, and what bathrooms to use, and what books to read. There's just a lot of infringement on our privacy and freedom. These threatened by the right wing and the Republicans in particular. So I think, I think Biden has a good shot. It may well end up being another Biden. It looks like it's going to be a Biden Trump second match, and I think Trump is a loser, and will, if that happens, will show that it is true again, or it will prove to be true again.
Taryn, it don't look like there are going to be any serious challenges for the Democratic primary against Mr. Biden. Um, but really, it's really not the man, is it? I mean, Kamala Harris is much younger, and she's going to be part of the ticket. But it's really not even about Kamala Harris either, is it? Isn't it about the movement and the issues that will animate the broader electoral public to register and come out and vote and fight around the issues? And hasn't that movement issue been, and the galvanization of it, um, in most places around the country, that's been missing since 2020?
Yeah, no, I confess that I actually did not watch the Joe Biden commercial, but I did watch the first speech that he gave after announcing that he was running again for president. And he gave it to the Building Trades Workers Union. And in that discussion, obviously, in the commercial, I'd read about the commercial and he's talking about freedom and stuff. But when he's talking to the union audience, he's talking to the people that actually put that program into practice, right? Like without an organized working class, we can't get anything done in this country. And so I think that there is an understanding, maybe not from Biden, because the man has been in public office for like a quarter or 20% of the country's actual history, but the people around him, it is important to not fall into this trap of like great man of history stuff. All the people that work in the office buildings adjacent to the White House, I think that they understand that strengthening labor at this point is probably the most important thing that we could do. I'd said that I would support Joe Biden as long as he gets the PRO Act passed, because that for me is probably the most important thing that any president could do at this point is strengthen labor. Because in order to put a program of actual freedom, and Marx reminded us that the reason why we are communists is because we do seek freedom, and that actual freedom is not something that you can get under capitalism. That's the way that you put the rubber to the road, so to speak. That it's not just about slogans, because Anita is so right. Like you look at Florida, and you want to talk about business rights, and he's going after Disney and losing terribly. You want to talk about parental rights. It's like parents don't get control over whether or not their kids can go on certain kinds of field trips anymore, or what their pronouns are, etc. Like there's obviously the hypocrisy there on the right, but on the left, if the left is going to be serious about it, and and it's fine to challenge whether or not Joe Biden is more of a centrist or toward the right. But if the left, as a movement, wants to achieve this stuff, it does have to really throw its lot in with labor, because that's the only way that this is going to happen.
Strengthening labor, Scott, the most important thing that could be done, the right to organize, to collectively bargain. Um,
I agree. Yeah, I think that I would say that the two most important, like on an equal level with each other, whatever, are passing the PRO Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, making sure that the right to vote is protected, and beating back the right wing assaults on it. Those two things together would go a long way to disarming the extreme right, and putting us on a path toward a much more democratic society. And it's really frustrating to see People sometimes counterpose, you know, electoral struggle on the one hand to militant or whatever street heat struggle on the other, as if they're somehow two, different strategies, and you choose one or the other. They're intertwined with each other. They're both ways of building and exercising power. And until the left broadly understands that and is really capable of taking up electoral struggle in a militant way, in a revolutionary way, we're gonna stay stuck, I think.
We're going to stay stuck. And as important as all of those things are, and we should not in any way diminish them, we also have to think about the right to live free, our right and the right of people around the world to live free of U.S. imperialism and the U.S. military buildup and Cold War 2.0 and the demonization of China and the blockade against Cuba and the attempt to systematically undermine left and progressive governments around the world. And a movement has to be built around it. God damn it. And we had a meeting last night, about 15, 20 party activists, young and old, came together to plan a peace conference of party activists this fall to begin thinking about re-energizing a working class approach and the involvement of the working masses, Black, brown, Asian, white, um, Native American, Arab, people of all faiths, to fight for such a peace agenda, which is missing, because of the almost $1 billion military budget that was passed over and above what Biden even asked for, which was way too much already. And so these are issues. Talk about May Day as International Workers' Day, that we cannot ignore as we fight this fascist danger. Because while the main thrust of it comes from the right and from the MAGA Trump movement, military buildup, war is fertile ground, Anita, for the growth of these kinds of ideas. We want to bring our program to a close today by taking note of the passing of a great life, the life of the actor, singer, cultural worker, social activist, socialist,
Heartthrob.
huh?
Heartthrob.
Heartthrob. It wasn't my heartthrob, but your heartthrob, that's fine. Harry Belafonte. Prince wasn't my heartthrob either, but the generation I grew up with, they loved him some Prince. And I imagine they said the same thing about Paul Robeson and a number of others. But Harry Belafonte passed, and his was a well-lived life, from the beginning of his career up through his 90s. And here we see him with Martin Luther King. He played a big role in the civil rights movement. Harry played a big role in the fight against apartheid in South Africa and the Free South Africa movement. He was a great friend of socialism, particularly in the German Democratic Republic, where he visited many times. We see him now with Fidel Castro back in the day. He was an outspoken advocate for social justice and changed many a life. And in the initial term of Barack Obama. He was an ardent supporter of his presidency, but later he became a little critical of it, and felt that the radicalness of the struggle for, or let me put it this way, the radical demands, the radicalism that was demanded by the struggle for equality somehow went missing, and that the movement was not placing radical demands. And here we see an exchange that took place between Cornel West and President Obama, with Sonia Sanchez, our old friend, standing by the side. And in a certain sense, it was prompted, if memory serves, by Belafonte, who had made some critical remarks. And Obama replied, "Why aren't you guys giving me a break? You don't understand what I'm up against." And he was up against a storm. You know, the economy had just collapsed when and the Tea Party was uh, launching assault broadside after broadside against his administration. The first African American president, Mr. Obama, felt that his allies weren't giving him the support that he. And you can see his eyes as he's, the good Reverend said, Obama cussed me out in that exchange. A little bit of that history. Anyway, rest in peace, Harry Belafonte. Rest in power. Um, and we pledge today and every day to carry on the great legacy that you and Harry Belafonte, you and Sidney Poitier, you and Paul Robeson, you and a whole number of others embody. Last but not least, PW Fund Drive ends on Monday. Go to peoplesworld.org and /donate. Your $5, $10, $20, $50, $100 contributions are needed, necessary. Again, we get no money from Elon Musk, no money from Chase Manhattan Bank, no money from General Motors. We rely on you, on us, to make this publication happen. Till next week, stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight, and let's remember to fight sexual assault against women and men and people of other genders, and not give an inch in that struggle. It affects all of us in myriad ways. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Happy
Bye.
May Day.
Happy May Day,
May.
comrades.
Happy May Day.
Thanks to our producer.